Being recorded. All right. So this session is being recorded, and thank you all for being here. I'm so grateful that I get to share this information with a group of interested people. It is definitely a passion of mine. I tried to kind of relay that in my mini bio that I put on the flyer for today. I truly don't believe that students can fully express themselves musically without a solid foundation in technique. And in order to get that solid foundation, there's just certain principles that I think need to be understood and applied in order to make our students feel as successful as they can. Because of course, the goal is making music. If we're not in it to make music, if we're in it just to pound keys really fast, then we might suggest they go into carpentry. So we really want to create a musical atmosphere for our students. I do want to ask that everyone be muted as I'm presenting. And if there's, I'll try to stop throughout and see if there's any questions throughout. If there is a question, go ahead and unmute yourself to ask the question, and then remute yourself while I answer. The last time there were kind of some audio issues with the last video, so I just want to make sure that everybody who goes back and watches the session later is able to catch, and everyone who's watching the session now is able to hear what I'm saying, so that we can understand it as clearly as possible. I believe that is all of the housekeeping items that I have. So I just want to start, I like to start every session by talking about two influential women, one being Dorothy Taubman. And a lot of people are familiar with the Taubman approach. Probably some of you have come from that the new Facebook group. And Dorothy was this innovative woman, who had these pianists coming to her who were very talented musicians, and yet they were being cut down by physical limitations or even fatigue and injury. And she just said, something's not right about that. And so she started to observe the people who had long careers in playing music and successful careers in playing music, and what were some things that she could notice about their playing that maybe these other students weren't doing. So she was a very observant woman. And then the person who I learned the Taubman approach from mainly is a woman who is, her name is Sheila Page. And she, I believe it was I think she ran it for 18 years, the Keyboard Wellness Seminar. And she had a tremendous respect for the work of Mrs. Taubman, and she wanted to take that work and really expand on it. Taubman really dealt a lot with the forearm and some with the upper arm, but it kind of seemed to stop there. And Sheila wanted people to recognize that the arm is attached to a torso, the torso is attached to legs, and inside of all of this physical mess, we also have a mind and a spirit and a soul that also need nurturing and taken care of. All of these things have to work together in order for us to function well as musicians. So Sheila's seminar was really focused on that, and she's who I did the majority of my training with throughout undergrad and graduate school. Other teachers that I have to thank, of course, for learning this technique would be Dr. Brian Allison, Mrs. Vicki Conway, and Dr. Angeline Chang. Those were professors who kind of helped me all along the way, all while under Sheila's tutelage. So I would not be the person I am today. I would not be here presenting. I probably wouldn't even be teaching music or playing the piano at all if it weren't for these remarkable people. So I always try to give them credit at the beginning of my sessions. So I'm going to do just a small review from the last lecture and just kind of make sure that we all are on the same page going into today's lecture, because today's lecture is a pretty heavy topic. So last time we talked about a man named Otto Ortmann. And he wrote a book, I believe, towards the beginning of the 20th century. It's out of print now. And it was called The Mechanics of Piano Playing. I think I got that right. And we draw, in the Taubman language, we draw on 3 of his major principles. One of those is the least amount of effort produces the maximum result. Now, I quote that, I believe I quote that directly. Obviously, we know the least amount of effort would be doing absolutely nothing at all, and so that is not clearly what's true. What is meant by that is you only want to do as much as you need to do. If you don't need to be making huge motions, don't make huge motions. If you don't need to spend hours and hours working on something that you got in a matter of 5 minutes, don't spend hours and hours working on it. You're just going to end up wearing yourself down, both physically, mentally, spiritually. The second of these principles is that all repetitive motions should happen in the mid-range of motions. So as human beings, we have extreme ranges of motion, and we have mid-ranges of motion. And it should be a pretty obvious principle, I would think, that the smaller the motion, the faster it can be. The bigger we do something, the slower it has to become. And then his third principle is to avoid the dual muscular pull. So a dual muscular pull, or in the medical field they call it a muscular co-contraction, is when you have 2 opposing sets of muscles working antagonistically. So for example, if I flex my third finger but extend all of my other fingers, I have a muscular co-contraction going on there, a dual muscular pull. And when you have those 2 sets of muscles working in opposition to one another, neither one of them are working at their best because they're working against one another. And you can try this at home if you like. It's not a very pleasant feeling, and if you try to wiggle your fingers, you start to feel kind of locked. So we try not to do that. Another big principle that I feel like I kind of blew through last time, that I maybe didn't do as much justice as I would have liked, is the idea of alignment with the arm. Of course, I spoke a lot about the arm as one unit, and that skeleton arm that I ordered, that I kept on bringing up last time that I didn't have, did arrive. So here's kind of that visual representation. We won't go through the anatomy again, or the full anatomy and all the implications, but just kind of for your viewing pleasure, you have your fingers, you have your wrist, you have your radius over here, your ulna over here on the pinky side. Sorry, this is I don't have enough hands to do this, and I even have an extra one with me today. So your ulna on the pinky side, your radius on the thumb side, crossing over the ulna, worth noting, and then your humerus is that upper bone. Then you have your scapula, shoulder blade, and your clavicle, the collarbone. And we talked about how the weight of the arm is derived from that upper arm, that humerus. We also talked about how the radius is able, this is palm up, the radius turns over, and then to go over palm down, it rotates over the ulna. And we talked about how the ulna cannot turn over the radius because it is hooked in at the elbow. There's a bone-to-bone connection, and you probably can't see it terribly clearly. I'll get a little bit closer to the camera. All right. And so it cannot turn over. So in order for us to rotate over the thumb or towards the pinky, the elbow has to swing out, and the upper arm has to swing out all the way back to the shoulder. All right. So that's just kind of a review of the anatomy of the arm. But what I want to focus on just a little bit more, and I'm going to switch my camera angle here, is this idea of alignment. Because it's very important. We talked about some of the implications, one of which, of course, being that playing with what Mrs. Taubman called twisting, or in again, medical terminology, we would call this ulnar deviation or radial deviation, all right? And I'll go to the side camera in a minute and show you, but if the wrists dip or if the wrists raise, all of those are forms of breaking the alignment. And there's 2 major problems with breaking the alignment. One is, of course, what we talked about last time with the carpal tunnel, being able to, oftentimes causing injury because it's working nerves and tendons around a curve, and they begin to get irritated. The other problem is if we accept the principle of arm weight, which we're going to talk about today, If we accept that principle as being true, that we use the weight of the arm to make a key go down, if I play like this, and it's a little hard to see, I didn't get the camera quite right, but if I play like this with my wrist pulled in, my arm is stuck out here, and thus the weight of my arm cannot be truly behind any finger that I play. And then let me just show you really quickly from the side, from the right side, what it looks like when the wrist dips down or dips up or pulls up, all right? All of those are forms of misalignment in the hand, and all of those prevent the arm weight from truly resting in the bottom of the key. So I believe that that kind of catches us up to speed. So we left off saying about the hand that if the arm is not, if we want to operate in the mid-range of motion, for the fingers that's about this, okay? Any further and I start to be in extreme range of motion, I start to engage those long flexors and extensors. So my mid-range of motion is right here, all right? And that's helpful to understand, because if we accept that as being true, and we accept the fact that we play with the arm weight as being true, then we have to figure out another motion besides just lifting and dropping the fingers, because lifting and dropping the fingers in the mid-range of motion doesn't do anything. The keys aren't going down, all right? So by themselves, lifting by themselves, the fingers aren't going to do anything. However, if I take and understand that my forearm is going to bear down the weight of my upper arm behind a finger, then I say, okay, now it's possible for me to pick up and drop into the key with the weight of my arm. Okay? So how do we get to the point where we're able to use our arm weight efficiently? Well, there are 4 motions, and I'm going to switch camera just a second here. There are 4 motions available to us. Yes, I got the right angle. There are 4 motions available to us. We have up and down, we have in and out, or backward and forward, we have side to side, and we have rotation. And we're going to talk about that 4th one today. But what we all need to understand when it comes to talking about any of those 4 forearm movements, none of them can operate by themselves. They have to work together. Saying that a technique can run on rotation alone is like saying the body can run on the digestive system alone. Well, what about the circulatory system? What about the respiratory system? What about all the other systems at work, the neurological system? All of those things are at play. So all these systems have to work together in order for us. So all of these motions have to work together in order for us to have our most efficient technique. So today we're going to be talking about rotation, but we aren't going to start there. We're going to start with arm weight and balancing, and the balancing thereof. So one common error that I see a lot of students do is they start out by bringing their arms up like this. And you might say, well, what's wrong with that? I'm already feeling it in my arms. What's wrong with that? Well, I've got what we call a collapsed elbow right now, and it's maybe a little bit hard to see, but my elbow is pointing, if I just let it drop, it's going to go right into my lap. It's pointing straight down. So instead of just going straight in, which kind of pulls on the muscles here in my arm and creates a tightness in my upper arm, I like to start with my arms down by my side and bring them up, palms up, and turn over. And as I do that, you can see now my elbow is supported. It's not stuck up in the air, and it's not pointed down, it's not collapsed, it's just supported. And a supported elbow is very important because the elbow itself is not a bone. The elbow is where that ulna hooks into the humerus. So the elbow has to be supported because that weight bears down through the ulna, And if the ulna's collapsed, then your weight is going to collapse. If the ulna is stuck up in the air, then your weight is stuck up in the air. All right? And neither of those things, neither of those words, stuck up in the air or collapse, really imply a sense of balance. So that gets the elbows where they ought to be. Then another thing that we want to talk about is balance points in the fingers. So last time we talked about large body balance points. We talked about 2 feet, 2 sit bones, 2 hands. All right? Today we're going to talk about each finger having its own unique balance point. And unfortunately, my skeleton friend does not help us out too much here. But if you get a good skeleton replica of the hand, you'll see that the bones of the fingers are not rounded off like the fingers are. They have almost a plane type ending, a flat surface type ending to them that allows for us to feel balanced on them. When I bring my arm up like this and put my hand on the keys, you might notice that there's a natural incline towards the pinky side of the hand. It's natural. I'm not making it. It's not a collapsed elbow. That's what it looks like if I'm collapsed. All right. But I'm also not rotated over my thumb like this. Okay. I don't make my hand a table. I often tell my younger students, if I was meant to have a table as a hand, I would have been given a table as a hand. My hand is meant to look like a hand, and my hand looks like this. All right. So the hand has a natural tilt. And that natural tilt, really, if you just try this at home, you can try it on a hard surface. You could even try it in your lap if you'd like. If you get that natural tilt, you're going to feel each finger pretty much puts itself on its balance point. All right? You don't have to really do any rearranging. The problem enters when we tell our students, oh, you've got to play with a flat hand at the top, and then they over-rotate over the radius, and it starts to feel ugly and held up. And again, if you wiggle your fingers here, and then if you let them go and wiggle them here, I think you'll be able to feel a difference. So if you're just released, and then if you turn over and you feel that, you should be able to feel a difference. So we'll start with talking about finger number 2. Finger number 2 is the only finger, and with my students sometimes, you have to issue the caution of don't try this at home, but sometimes I'll just take a pen or a marker and just go to town on my fingers, just showing them, and don't touch your keys after you do this, if you do this, but so that they can see, especially online. It's hard sometimes for them to visualize. So 2 plays right in the center of the pad, like so. All right? 3 plays slightly off center of the pad, like so. 4 plays even more off center of the pad. And 5 is going to play out in that corner of the nail. Sorry, in the outer corner of the nail. So that, well, it's a little hard to demonstrate sideways, but like that. And what that would look like to this point is that, rather than that. All right. So again, if you just try it out this way, it's supported, not collapsed, but supported. And just wiggling those fingers in that mid-range of motion, not extreme, but just in that mid-range. And then you turn it over so that you have that flat tabletop hand, and you wiggle those fingers. I think you can feel a difference, and maybe not so much in the fingers themselves, but I feel a tightness up in my forearm. I feel it almost starts to burn, and it happens very quickly. And so you have to be careful to avoid that. A great analogy that anyone can understand, including our students, is that balancing arm weight on the fingers is very much like balancing the body on our feet. All right? And I often use walking, climbing stairs, all that sort of thing as an illustration, so that if I stand up, oh good, I didn't even check to see if I stood up, if you'd be able to see all of me, so yeah, you can. All right? If I stand up, I'm balancing the full weight of my body into my feet. If I start to walk, I'm transferring from balance point to balance point. We talked about that last time. And that's what moving the arm around the keys is like. If you've ever seen, this was This is one of my favorite illustrations, and I don't know if Sheila originated this illustration or if Mrs. Taubman did. But if you've ever seen the Addams Family, they had their hand that walked around the house independent of a body by itself, called Thing. And it would just run around like this, all right? And Mrs. Taubman had this idea that she would talk about called walking hand and arm. And that's kind of that idea that the fingers walk the hand and the arm. And if you can, I'm going to demonstrate on my lid here. If I sit like so, I'm a little far away from the keys, or from the piano, but that's okay. If I start walking my fingers out, you see the arm starts to follow, and I'm eventually going to get far enough that my torso has to follow. Now, for some reason, a lot of times, people tend to start motion for the piano especially somewhere back in here. Some people start it back in the forearm or at the elbow. Some people, lift at the shoulder and kind of you see this kind of flop and jerk sort of thing. And it's counterintuitive because you move from the smallest part and the bigger parts start to follow, just like the feet. The feet are not the biggest part of our body, but they bear up all the rest of our body. So in that same manner, the fingers can bear the weight of the ulna behind them, but rather the weight of the upper arm that is borne down through the ulna. So when you play, and let me get to a closer camera shot for this. When you play each finger on its individual balancing point, even on the thumb, and I'll show you the left hand side, or the left hand from the right hand camera. There we go. If I play that, even there where I'm playing the thumb, I'm not thinking of my radius being behind the thumb. I'm thinking, because really it's not. It runs across the arm like this. So really, where the radius ends up is over here anyways. So I'm thinking of my ulna instead, balancing behind the thumb. And I'm just picking my notes kind of randomly. All right, so that's balancing that arm weight, that ulna, behind each finger on each finger's individual balance point. I already talked about the wrist being level without tension. One thing, and I kind of mentioned this last time, but just to kind of re-emphasize, and this pulls into that principle of staying in that mid-range of motion again. That's a very important principle for us here. The fingers in their natural state have a natural curve to them, okay? The language that I use with my students is rounded and supported. Even though curve is an okay word, to me, curl is a trigger word. As soon as I say curl, I lock up. So you can try this at home, though. If you just let your hands rest in their just natural position, you bring them up in support, and you just wiggle the fingers, and then you go into that classic, holding the bubble softly or anything, and you pull those fingers in, there's tremendous restriction in movement, okay? So we try to avoid that. We have that rounded and supported, which allows for the fingers to balance on their individual balance points. So then what I do, the question comes, how do I, again, my goal is to present this in a way that hopefully you can take in and understand this information and then hopefully take it to your students and introduce it to them. I do have to warn you, rotation, which we're talking about today, it took me about 2 years to fully understand it. And when I say fully understand it, I mean, it's an easy enough thing to intellectually understand, but physically, to get the practice of it down. And there's steps sometimes that you have to go through, especially if you're retraining. But oftentimes with younger students or new students, it doesn't take as long, but it still takes time. And it takes patience on our part and takes patience on their part as well as they're learning it, because they're retraining. And what I will often do is introduce a concept, and and I say this playfully, please don't misunderstand what I'm about to say, but I beat them up on that concept for maybe 3 or 4 weeks, and then I leave it alone. I let it kind of just soak into their brain, and then maybe we'll revisit that and bring it to the next place, you know. And so, because this can be very overwhelming, especially if you've been playing for a long time and your teacher all of a sudden says, no, you've got to do it this way. All right. So we just want to be careful and sensitive to our students' needs there, because again, that plays into that mind and soul and spirit part of the whole person, and we've got to treat that as well. We've got to treat that with kindness, because if it's just about the physical, then it's just not gonna do us a whole lot of good. So, how I start introducing students to the concept of arm weight is actually in their laps. I'll have them sit balanced. I'm gonna sit a little unbalanced for a second, just to avoid having to switch the camera too much. But I just start them in their lap and just pick up your arm and drop it. Pick up your arm and drop it. And a lot of times they confuse dropping with throwing. And I think most of us usually have one of these around, hopefully, a pen or a pencil. So I'll take them and I'll have them hold the pencil. And I'll say, okay, now drop it. And they drop it. Then I'll have them pick it up again. And I say, okay, now throw it. And they do that. And then I ask, well, which one was easier to do? And I don't think I've ever had a student, not even my sarcastic students, which we all know we get those, but I don't think I've ever had even a sarcastic student say that throwing the pencil was easier. Dropping it is, of course, easier, and I ask them why. Well, because, and they always answer, well, I just have to let go. And that's the idea that arm weight starts with. You pick it up, and then you just let it go. Now, of course, when we're doing this, what I'm introducing them to is a total dead drop. Now, that's not what we're going to be doing at the piano. We're going to be dropping to balance points. But sometimes when you get a student that's just so tied up with tension, you have to kind of, at the Keyboard Wellness Seminar, Sheila would always talk about it kind of being like Goldilocks. If you're coming from too tight and too tied up a background, you have to go to almost too released a background. You have to just flop it, okay? Not every student necessarily needs to start there, all right? But then when it comes to going to the piano, we've talked about balance points, and so then we practice just picking up and dropping to balance points. And I often use just a pentascale for that. Sometimes what I'll do is introduce the scale in tetrachords to students, so I'll just have them, do that so that they get used to hearing the scale. But anyways, that was an unnecessary side. So, but I'll oftentimes start them with 5-finger patterns, because then there's no worry about picking up or dropping or any of that sort of thing. Or not picking up or dropping. I'm sorry. There's no worry about shifting the hand over for scale fingering or anything like that. They're just picking up and dropping into the keys. Another thing that you have to be okay with, especially I recommend when you first start a student, is regardless of how soon their method book introduces them to slurs and legato playing, I can't put a time stamp on it. Every student is different, but for a good portion of their first year of study, most of my students do not play legato. I just don't even brush it. When they ask about the slur or the sign, we aren't going to talk about that just yet. That's a big, you can make a big deal out of it. That's a big secret sort of thing, or big surprise, and so when you're ready for it, and that gets them excited, because eventually when you do start talking about slurs and legato, well, it's not as exciting to work on as they thought it was going to be. So the bigger deal you make of it, perhaps the more excited they'll be to do the work necessary to play legato. So I really emphasize them just learning how to pick up and drop. And sometimes we just, play random notes on the piano and just work on picking up and dropping to points of balance. If you notice that they're having trouble finding their balance points, or you notice that they're having trouble with collapsing fingers, remember that you can always take them away from the piano or close the lid on the piano. You can also, you also need to check everything. When it's collapsed fingers, collapsed wrists, or anything, I mentioned this last time, when I see a picture that just shows this, and, well, what's wrong with my student's hand? Well, right now, obviously, what's wrong with it is I'm making it do that, but I could be sitting way slumped, I could be sitting way low, I could be sitting way high, you know? I could be sitting with lifted shoulders, which was what I just did to imitate the sitting way too high. There's all kinds of things that can be diagnosed, but we've already kind of talked about that. But when you have a student that's just having trouble with that, take them away from the piano. There's always something about the piano that just scares the student into thinking that they, so teach them about balance points on the fall board, and just, have them work and have them go really slowly into the key, especially if they're having trouble with this first joint, because the last thing you want to instruct them to do is to pull it in, not even as a means to an end. You don't want to suggest to them that they do that. You just allow them to feel nice and secure, and they go down. And when you see them, and I'll show it where you can see it. Let's say they go to 5 and they have that kind of push out or whatever. Okay, then you teach them, okay, go under there with your left hand and just support that. Just kind of push it in. So without making any sort of activation in this hand, allow this hand to kind of come under and allow them to feel what it's like while they're supported. And that's the wonderful thing about Zoom lessons and the student, is that they can help themselves with that. They can help themselves figure that out. All right? As we guide them along, of course. Most of the time they aren't going to do that. But I find that is often successful in helping students get rid of collapsed fingers and really understand balance points. It's taking them off the keys for a little bit and just on a solid surface, and they start to feel that. And then when they come back to the keys, just don't make a big deal of it. Don't say, okay, now you're on the keys, Just say, okay, now we're going to go back to the keys. And then the kid doesn't get psyched out about it. So then that's kind of my introduction to arm weight. Then we have to start saying, okay, it's always fun for the kids. They love trying this. I say, okay, now I want you to, we practice picking up and dropping like this. I say, okay, now I want you to do that really fast, just as fast as you can. And they quickly realize, see, I didn't even intend to play a minor pentascale there. So they quickly realize that's not gonna cut the mustard, because as fast as we can move that's just not a very fast motion, even in the mid-range of motion. All right. And I have them say, okay, so what else do we have? We have side to side, and I have them do that just as fast as they can. Okay, well, that's not a very fast motion either. In and out, just as fast as we can. Oh, well, that's not a very fast motion either. Again, even in the mid-range of motion. Then I have them do the rotation. Oh, that's a fast motion. That's something that will pick our arm weight up and drop it just as quickly as we need to. All right? And so what I will generally start with, introducing them to rotation, I'll generally start with rotation towards the thumb. And that's because that, again, I'll pull our skeletal friend over here. That's because of that ability, of the radius to turn over the ulna, makes that a very easy, this is like gymnastics, and I was never very athletic. But there we go. All right, you can see that radius. And so that makes it very easy. The rotating towards the pinky is a little bit harder to understand, so I do that second. But so I just have them start, again, with just a 5-finger, or not a 5-finger pattern, but a pentascale. Same idea, but sometimes we misspeak. I try to avoid 5-finger patterns. But we have, and I just have them start picking up and dropping like that. Just turn the arm, because they can do this. Most kids have to be able to do this motion to, turn a doorknob or something. So they just do this. And they've already practiced falling to their balance point on their thumb, so we don't have to worry about that very much. And they start to get in the hang of that. So however many 5-finger patterns I'll say they're working on at the time. I say, okay, just do that for a week, and just start to feel the thumb by itself, and just play the thumb. So it becomes a 1-finger pentascale. All right. Then when it comes to the pinkies are a little bit they're complicated, and you can do the same thing. You can do a pentascale sort of thing. That's not my favorite. One of my favorite exercises, and you can do either of those exercises with all of the fingers, by the way. for rotation or just picking up and dropping. It's totally fine to do that. But the 5, they have to realize that it's not the arm. Let me show you this way. It's not, if I do that, I'm not rotating. I'm twisting my arm, but I'm not rotating. What allows for that to happen is not my skeletal system, but my musculature system. Okay? And when I do that, if you want to try that at home, just turning without allowing any swing out at the elbow, you can probably feel, again, tremendous tension, and especially along here, you feel a lot of tension. So if you let that go, and instead you swing out at the elbow and drop. All right? So you've got to be careful, okay, that it doesn't turn into the chicken wing. You know, we aren't flapping our arms like that. It's that slight motion, all right? And it's connected from the top of the fingertip all the way down. So I will often have them do either the 5-finger pattern, or sometimes what I'll do is I'll start them on Ds, the second D up and the second D down on the piano, all right? And I have them just start and just do chromatic scales in contrary motion. And of course I like that. Sorry about the tuning of the piano. I like that, sorry, because the pattern of black keys and white keys stays the same in the hand. So they start to feel that same balance, same finger. They're mirroring their motions, and that makes it a lot easier for them to learn and to grasp onto. So that allows them to start to feel the pinky. And I would say the pinky and the thumb are the most challenging fingers to get right. If you can get the pinky and the thumb right, you don't have to worry too much about the other. So that's kind of how I introduce rotation to them. Then we talk about what is rotation. Well, it's the fastest way to transfer our arm weight from balance point to balance point, or note to note. The thing to understand about rotation, and there's a diversity of opinions on this matter. And I am not here to say one is right and one is wrong. I'm not here to say, what I'm here to say is this is what I have found in my education and in my experience, and in my experience both as a pianist and as a teacher, this is what I have found to be the most efficient, all right? That doesn't discredit anybody else's opinion about rotation, but this is what I have found to be the most efficient way of doing it. Rotation is a small motion, and I want you to understand that rotation is a small motion, okay? In other words, my conceiving of rotation is not this. Even if I have a student, do these dramatic pickups and drops to kind of get used to stuff, that is not rotation to me. That's like looking at a caricature of somebody and saying, "Oh, that's a nice picture of them." Well, that's not that. That's not them. That's not a picture. It's a cartoon. It might give you the idea of what they look like, but it's not the actual person. The part of the brain associated with motion learns the motion associated with the size of the motion. In other words, the size of the motion is a part of the motion. So it doesn't, and that part of the brain does not care about speed either. Once you are, and let me clarify that statement. You can only go as fast as you can go. We all have our physical limitations. You'll only ever be able to go as fast as you're able to go, but you'll oftentimes be able to go a lot faster than you think you're able to if you learn the right motion. And so I don't teach my students, okay, we're going to do big motion, and now we're going to learn how to make that motion smaller. I don't teach. I don't follow the idea of minimization. I teach them the motion as it should be. So, for the most part, sometimes we do the big motion, but then I say, okay, now we're going to learn something different. We're going to learn a different way of doing it. So I'm just going to do another pentascale here, and just show you, even going slow. All right. That's the size of the motion to me, and I can do it quickly. All right, and it's the same motion. Let's see. I've got chicken scratch here, so let me just make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay. There's minimization that's an idea that's taught commonly with the Taubman approach. Another differentiation that Sheila made when she started doing her own seminar and her own workshops is the origin of the motion of rotation, or really of all the motion. And Taubman, to my understanding, teaches that the arm turns the fingers. And I'm not trying to misrepresent here, but that the arm turns the fingers like so. So, for example, if I were to play a 5-finger scale, I would do. I'm giving a poor representation of their work. Now, obviously, there's some other issues because there's a little bit of collapse in the wrist. But to me, that's a problem that comes with that territory of originating the motion in the arm. But if instead I think of the motion as originating in the fingertips carrying the arm around, and you might also notice how much smaller the motion is naturally when it starts in the fingers. All right? So look at how much the arm has to turn in order for me to, if I'm turning my fingers with my arm, look at how big of a motion it has to make. Whereas if I turn my arm with my fingers, see how much smaller of a motion that is? All right, so that's another place where some of the ideas diverge. Okay, then we want to talk about about the fact that there are two different types of rotations. All right, the first rotation is what we would call a single rotation, and this is what most people would conceive of when they think of rotation. And a single rotation is simply, we call it a single rotation because it's one continuous motion. The preparation to play becomes the playing motion itself. And so that's what most people would recognize as patterns where rotation is necessary, is trills, broken octaves, Alberti bass, because you're just bringing the arm back and forth like that. All right? So a lot of people, even if they don't have the correct understanding of what rotation is for and will recognize that that's a place to rotate. All right? In the Taubman approach, and I believe this is one of Dorothy's ideas and innovations, is that every note needs a rotation. We rotate into every note, regardless of if they are consecutive scalar or if they're alternating back and forth. All right? And not only does every note need a rotation, it also, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, it also needs an up and a down, an up or a down rather, an in or an out, and a left or a right. So some up or down, some in or out, and some lateral motion. But we're talking about rotation right now. And so we talked about the single rotation, which is just that back and forth motion there, all right? And again, that's what we would most conceive of. Now, of course, if there's a single rotation, there must be a double rotation. And you're right, there is. So there are two parts to every rotation. There is the preparation and the playing. And of course, when I say that there are two parts to it, we don't want to think of it that way. We don't want to prepare and then play. We want to prepare and play. So it's one motion that we can break it down and analyze it in two parts. So with a double rotation, you have to stop the motion. So in single rotation, the motion just keeps going. In double rotation, if I'm going up more than two consecutive notes, I have to start that motion again. So if I just play 2, 3, 4, I have to pick up to the right and play to the left. Then I pick up. That's a single rotation there. I pick up to the left and play to the right, and I am breaking down the motions here. But then I have to stop that motion. I can't keep going into my fourth finger. I have to stop that motion and pick up to the left again and play to the right again. All right? So that's the difference basically between single and double rotations. Fingers 2, 3, and 4 can pick up and play either way. So I can pick up to the right and play to the left, or I can do the other way. All right? Both work. The thumb can only play towards the thumb. All right? The thumb cannot pick up and play this way. All right? This is not picking up the thumb. This is dropping the thumb. The thumb is down. Picking up is this way. So in order for the thumb to pick up, it must go this way. And we'll talk about that again. We'll talk about that again in a minute when we talk about playing scales. The pinky almost always plays towards the pinky. The pinky on single notes always plays towards the pinky. Let me put it that way. So when it's a single note, the pinky plays towards the pinky. All right. When it is a double note, so an interval or a chord, the pinky actually, even if it doesn't involve the thumb, that rotation is going to be towards the thumb. And I'll show you from the left side so you can see that. All right. Because if I play towards the pinky, I get that split sound, and I also it kind of starts to feel a little bit ugly in the. I start to feel like I'm gripping onto the keys to stay on. But here allows me to drop to my balance points and not have, you know, the split in my notes. And if I have a split in my notes, that's due to my incompetence and not the technique. Let's see. So that deals with the thumb and the pinky. Let's see. Rotation helps in scales, in scale passages and in scales. Rotation helps to avoid pulling the thumb under the hand or the hand over the thumb. So this sort of motion or this sort of motion can be avoided using rotation. All right. Now, again, this is another place where where Sheila diverged from regular Taubman, and again, I've tried it, and you know, all I can say when someone disagrees with something that I have to say is that if you found something that works for you and for your students, actually works and produces the results you want, then keep on doing it. All right. What I'm here for is for teachers who are looking for something different for their students, who have kind of been, it's been working, but maybe I think it could maybe work a little bit better, and that's what I'm here to do, and hopefully this will be your answer. So when I play a scale, when Taubman will teach, and of course part of it is it comes in what I talked about before with the arm turning the fingers versus the fingers turning the arm. All right. So when they're playing a scale and turning with the arm, I believe they teach that the thumb tracks along. It doesn't pull under, but it tracks along. It kind of falls behind whichever finger is playing. And then they set up the arm angle to put you above the key that you need to play. Now, I don't play around with that a whole lot because I believe that I found what works best for me and what works best for my students. So I believe that they also have a kind of emotion there. But to me, even when I watch them play it, some of them play it, it kind of looks a little looks and sounds a little bit uneven to me, and it just doesn't seem comfortable. But that's personal perception there. So instead of pulling the thumb under the hand or dropping it dropping the thumb behind the hand like that, instead, when I get to that third finger, now remember what I said about the thumb just a minute ago. In order to play, it's got to pick up, because it always has to play towards the thumb, all right? And it has to pick up to play. Up is this way, not this way. So it has to pick up this way, and as I rotate, this is my preparation. As I drop, I move over to the left. Let me do that better, okay? All right, and I am showing the motions a little bit bigger, more for the sake of the camera. So in speed, all right. Now, what students who are used to playing legato get concerned about is this right here, that there's a disconnect there. And when we're first working on rotation, they just have to become okay with that. All right? But there's a lot of other things that go into play here. For example, going in and up to the right hand, or to the third finger. All right? Now what happens, there's some debate even amongst people who study with and teach, who've studied with Sheila. There's some disagreement about what actually happens with the thumb. Some of them truly believe that it does pass under the hand, but it is a inactive passing. It's a passive passing. So it doesn't pull under the hand, nor when the hand is going the other way does it do it very, and it happens so quickly. And I think you can, I'd say I'm in the camp that yes, it does go under the hand passively after it picks up to play. All right, but it happens so quickly, and what Sheila termed that is a thmunder, 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 and it happens so fast that you can't say thumb under. That's how quickly it happens. All right. So that's just one of those little cute things that you can tuck away and use for a later date. But so you have this thunder. But if you're playing scales, and I'll apologize in advance. I haven't really been doing my, but all of this with rotation. All right. Now, one thing I haven't done so far today is contrast that without doing any rotation at all, with just playing with the fingers. All right, so I guess I'll stick with D. All right, so I'm going to just play with my fingers. All right, just using my fingers, not really engaging my arm at all, rotationally or anything else. All right, now, even with isolated technique, I don't know anyone who teaches that the arm should necessarily always just be completely still. So let me add a little arm motion with just the fingers playing. All right, that's about as fast as I can go, and you can hear some unevenness there in the beginning, or in the ending, in the middle, and it's just not a very pleasant sound, and it feels terrible. And the goal with technique is that you want a technique that feels great, but also gives you great sound. The last thing in the world that you want is to sound great and feel terrible, or to feel great and sound terrible. All right? So here, when I get rotation involved, let's see. All right? I feel a lot more ease. I'm a lot happier with my sound. You might not be. I don't know. I can't speak for you, but I just can't. I can't even begin to compare. I guess that's where I go out of range of camera. But I can't even begin to compare without that. It just gives so much speed, the rotation does, to the scale. Whereas this just feels, when it's just fingers, it just feels draggy and heavy. But the thing is, and you might see a small difference, but you probably don't see a huge difference in my arm and in my hand. And that's because it's such a small motion. I often find myself saying this and reminding myself of this. Rotation is most conspicuous by its absence. It's like we've got some notifications. Can we I think that's me.
Oh.
Let's see. I'm gonna go into our participants here real quick and just make sure everyone is muted. Okay. Sorry about that. Let's see. now trying to remember where I was. So rotation is most conspicuous by its absence. In other words, it's something that you have to experience it and feel it in order to know how effective it is. That when you take it away, the biggest indicator for me with students is not what do I see. Once I have them, in a good place physically speaking, as far as balance is concerned, it's not so much what do I see as what do I hear. Can I hear a tightness in sound, you know, or do I hear ease in sound? All right, and that's very important. Another big thing about rotation, and I probably should have talked about this at a different point, but rotation provides momentum. So, which is especially important, you know, for large leaps. You know, rather than yanking myself across the piano, you know, I rotate and my distance is gone. This, I think you can see how big of a struggle that is. If I rotate and of course have a good arm angle, all that goes away, you know. It provides momentum, you know. If I'm doing broken octaves, I guess I probably should have included an F sharp there, huh? You know, it gives that momentum. Now, there's other things at play there. It's not just that I'm rotating. I also am considering my ups and downs, my ins and outs, and my lefts and rights. So, for example, for broken octaves, the left and right, the lateral motion is far more prevalent than the rotation motion. All right. But that doesn't negate the importance of rotation. That doesn't take rotation out of the picture. Rotation gives you tremendous amounts of momentum that when you need to make a big change in position, it just, oops, sorry, I didn't skip an octave there. It allows for you to just get where you need to get because it just gives you that momentum in and out of the keys. And again, there's a lot more at work there, but with all of those motions working together, it turns out pretty swell for both you and your students in terms both of sound and confidence in their playing. I wanted to look at a couple teaching examples, pieces that probably most of us have taught over the years, and I just wanted to kind of show some of these concepts in action. So one of my one that's a popular teaching piece is the Kulau Sonatina Opus 55 number 1. That first movement is really I've judged it a lot at festivals. That's how I know a lot of people teach it. And I never hear it played very well. But that's another story for another day. But this is full of wonderful places that rotation can help students. A lot of the sonatinas are. One place I want to just kind of talk about, let's see, it's in measure, well, let's see, I don't have my measure numbers, but it's where that second theme kind of comes in with the... I want to talk about a little bit about that pattern there in the left hand, because that's a great example of a place where students can use single rotation, at least in that first measure of it. Oh, I do have measure numbers. That's measure 9. Look at that. I knew I'd eventually see them. All right. But then you get the interval involved. And remember what I said about intervals. Intervals rotate towards the thumb. So that's actually, when you have that pattern, when you have double notes with that's actually a double rotation. And sometimes it helps, rather than thinking of that as a double rotation, some people prefer to think down, up, down, up, down, up, and that's more of the pattern that they, because that's a little bit easier, because if I'm thinking this, it gets a little bit busy, but if I think down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, and then all of a sudden it's there, and it's not just my fingers playing. I'm sure we've all heard, some playing like that. And at the end of that, we just, we dig the fuzz out of our ears and we move on. But this allows far better tone control. All right, and that's a perfect starting spot for the next discussion, because here we go. Scale passage. Sorry. So a lot of times, and this is where that double rotation comes in very important, that double rotation where we swing back the direction that we came from instead of just rolling on this way. A lot of times our students think well, the note is just there. Why do I need to swing this way? And that's the point where and let me switch my camera because I'm going to stand up and walk. Let me tell you, I'll tell you again, walking is going to be probably your greatest teaching tool if you're trying to teach some of these concepts. When I go to walk, which direction do my feet swing first? Well, you can't really see my feet. Let's see. I'll step back here. I'll talk nice and loud. Hopefully the sound still comes through. So which direction do my feet swing? They swing back a little bit first because that helps give me the momentum that I need to get forward, to get that way. So when I have notes that are going this way, wonderful, all well and good, but I get my momentum by going this way. And that's a huge motion, by the way. We don't want to do it that huge. But I get my momentum by going this way. So I keep coming back this way. So the direction that I need to go, rather than, a lot of times just students will say, okay, well, it's right there, so I just kind of bring myself across, and let's see if I can do it. Let's see. Sorry, it's hard to play it wrong, you know. So you just kind of get this, you know, and then they start doing all kinds of weird things with their wrist, and then that's where those pictures come in. Well, my student's doing this with their wrist. Well, they aren't rotating. They don't have that confidence. All right, to where they're just. Here it is in slow motion, and I forgot I didn't switch my camera. Let me do that so that you can see it a little bit closer up. All right, and then, you know, and this is without rotation. And I think there you can probably see it, because again, there I'm not really involving my arm a lot. And again, this is not going to work on rotation alone. This is just me rotating. So I'm not gonna bring my arm in other than to rotate. I'm not gonna let it move up and down, in or out. Side to side is kind of unavoidable. Let's see. No, that's not right. All right, and it feels a lot better than just playing with my fingers, but I feel kind of stuck. So I'm going to play around with, and you could see I was creating some shapes with my arm that involved planning for long fingers and short fingers, and going into black keys and up to black keys. All right, and so. Very important concept. Now that'll be what I talk about more about next time, is moving in and up passages, and then combining those with rotation. And then the time after that, we'll talk about lateral motion, and then we'll talk about the concept known as forearm shaping. So using all four motions together in the right proportions. And that's going to be an example-heavy lecture, just kind of going through a lot of pedagogical examples. And what I would invite you to do is, if there are spots and challenges, I am trying to focus mainly on the teaching literature, but I'm not opposed to receiving, you know, stuff from the advanced literature if you have a question about that. But I am trying to mainly make my focus on teaching literature. So if there's any literature that you'd like to hear, or portions of literature that you'd like to troubleshoot, that'll be 2 months from now. But I can certainly look at it. I'd love to help people. I'd love to help you with examples that are meaningful to you in your studio. I think that's all I want to do with this one. And then let's see. Okay, we're doing all right on time. We'll wrap up shortly here. But I did want to go over to Beethoven Opus 49, number 2, and let's see. I think what I wanted, this one I didn't mark. Yes, what I want is kind of this closing theme here, where you have, in the right hand, you have this. All right, right? Where you have that hand, and I'm sure a lot of us have taught that. And what the problem that comes with this passage is that leap, So our students oftentimes, we'll see them, let's see if I can do this. I haven't played it in a while, but let's see. So we have, yeah. They always skip the rest there at the end, so I did too. But they can't make this leap. They're and then they have to and they're jumping all over. And instead they can get there with rotation, and then they move over. So if they use that rotation instead, rather than that, well, they got to get to the right note though. If they get to that point, rather than pulling themselves across this without any rotation, and what Mrs. Taubman called that was active and automatic rotation. In other words, you actively rotate as you're in that motion, and those fingers actively pick up and move over. All right, and that's a very important concept because it especially helps with the leaps. All right, the level of activity needed in the fingers varies on the passage. It's not as necessary. Your fingers they are active, but they aren't. It's maybe not quite as automatic because the note is right there. You don't need as much momentum. Of course, the further you need to go, the more momentum that you need to carry you that direction. So. Let's see. Yeah. I tell you, the ear is a powerful thing. You get used to hearing it wrong enough times and you start to play it wrong yourself. So having that rotation, of course, then again, this is another example of places where that rotation has to happen, and there's a lovely. You could actually change the fingering there if you wanted to, but you might find that traditional 5-3-1-2 fingering, but that's a place where that thumb has to move quickly, and it happens so quickly. It's really. Let me show you from the left side, so that you can see the right hand doing it. But you have that. And again, that thumb, it's clear to see. It does go under the hand, but it's so brief and it's so passive that it's not even worth acknowledging. It certainly isn't this anticipation and yank over like that. It's not that at all. You have this activity, this active, and then you move over. All right? And that makes a world of difference rather than trying to hold on to it and pull over. All right, which you really want to avoid doing. All right, so those are the examples. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself. No questions from anyone? Are there any questions that came up in the chat? Okay, so here's a good question from Melissa. At this point, if a student struggles with collapsed joints in the fingers, do you continue with the rounded and supported language, or do you try other things? I'm not sure if you asked that before I demonstrated on the fall board. But I would take them away from the piano. The language the vocabulary is less important than the result. Of course, we all know that. So I try, if the vocabulary isn't helping them, I either try to find new vocabulary or I switch kind of to demonstrating and letting them see this is what the hand should look like. But again, if I take them away from the piano, and this is no news to any of us here, that we need to get our students away from the piano occasionally. But if I take them away from the piano, then they start to be able to work with that, and they start to be able to get to that rounded and supported without pulling in, without collapsing and pushing out. Okay? Yeah. Are there any other questions? Or any questions in general? I don't think I missed any questions. I think a couple people had to pop out. This is a long lecture with a lot of things, and I even cut some stuff out. But who was my teacher again? Sheila Page. Yes, she's the person I kind of draw a lot of stuff from. She does a fabulous job of presenting her material. Unfortunately, due to just various reasons, she hasn't been able to recently, do lectures and workshops. Hopefully at some point she'll start doing that again. But in the meantime, I was getting a lot of questions from people about stuff, and I thought, well, I don't have anywhere that I can really send them, so I should probably start doing this myself. So that's kind of what got me here. So let's see, and we got that. All right. Well, thank you all so much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And I will, it's going to be the third Saturday of every month. I think the afternoon, last time I did it in the morning, and that didn't get as well of an attendance. So I think this is better. Again, I will probably, in all the places where I posted the advertisement for this, I will post the video of it. So if there's anything that you want to review that I said, feel free to. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and we can set up a virtual session where I could answer any questions that might arise. But thank you all so much for being in attendance, and I will see you next month.